As Boris likes to say, thank you, robot lady. All right, so recordings in progress. We have the toolsforthought.rocks domain. You can also get information about other, you can also share events that are related to Tools for Thought Rocks. So as a member of the Luma community, you can create events. So if you know of something that's related, feel free to create it in the Luma community, and everyone else that's in the Tools for Thought Rocks community will learn about it. So there are other things going on, lots of other things going on in this space. So feel free to let us all know what's going on there. A couple other links if you're interested. Fission, which is where Boris Mann, who's usually here, works. They kindly donate some space for us on a Discord channel. So they've got a channel on Discord called TFT or Tools for Thought or something like that, where we dialogue sometimes. So you're welcome to join that at fission.code/Discord. They also have donated this Zoom link, this pro Zoom link that we're using. So that's helpful. There is a YouTube channel with past recordings on it. And I do have a GitHub. That's the link that's not filled out there. We store chat transcripts and stuff like that in GitHub, but are not really using that for much. Main thing we do is we have a speaker series monthly. Welcome to the speaker series monthly. If this is your first time, we usually have 2 or 3 speakers. This month, we only have 1. I was mentioning to some other folks earlier on, if you're just joining, that I had a newborn just maybe 6 weeks ago. And so I'm kind of recovering from that. Haven't done as much prep for this particular event as I would for others in terms of recruiting speakers and stuff like that. So for February, we've already got Alexander Obernauer. Some of you might have read some of his lab notes. He's going to come and talk to us about some of the thinkings he's having around atomized OSs. If you would like to come and talk in February, let me know. I'm still looking for like 2 more folks to come volunteer and talk. Again, you don't have to be building a tool like Taylor or Alex, or even have a set of lab notes that are as well organized as Alex's are. To come and talk. So feel free to let me know if you'd like to come. There's an Airtable link, but you can always just email me as well. Cool. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Taylor and let him speak. So I stumbled across Taylor's writing and work that he was doing through Twitter, where he is Captain Chillpill with an underscore thrown in there somewhere. I'll let him throw his Twitter link in the chat if he would like, so that people can go check that out. But Taylor has a set of notes online called Everything Abridged, where he got it. That's his digital garden, that kind of stuff. A heavily interlinked little custom wiki. And he's also working on a tool that is in sort of the spirit of notational velocity and some of these other tools that some of you may be familiar with from bygone days. In terms of note-taking and thinking collaboratively. He's gonna be talking with us about that today. But yeah, so Taylor, I'll turn it over to you, let you rock and roll. You're on mute, by the way, Taylor.
I don't use Zoom on a day-to-day basis. Got to find where all the buttons are.
Before you go, Taylor, one thing. If you would like to throw questions in, I'm going to let Taylor guide how much we should interrupt him. But because we're a small enough group, we usually just unmute and ask the questions, and it's usually not a problem. If you're not comfortable with unmuting, or if you'd like to use the chat, I will at least be watching the chat. And if there's a point at which it makes sense to interrupt and ask Taylor a question from the chat, and I'll unmute and do that. So do whatever you're comfortable with, and whatever Taylor directs us to. He might say, like, let me talk for 10 minutes before interrupting me or whatever. But also feel free to use the chat for back channel. The chat transcripts we try to keep on GitHub, and usually there's a lot of good links, because a lot of us have these have exposure to a lot of different things, and it's been cool to see those things sort of surface in the chat. All right, now you can go, Taylor.
All right, so the share screen button is saying that the host has disabled screen sharing.
Man,
so that might need to be turned on.
What a jerk, that host. All right, who can share? All participants.
All right.
How about now?
Yep, should be good. Okay, hang on. Gotta tell Zoom that it's allowed to do that. Stand by. Okay, apparently I need to quit Zoom and log back in. So I'll see you in like 60 seconds.
See you, Taylor. Remember when you could like tell your computer to do stuff and your computer wouldn't say like, I don't think you can do that. Oh man. There should, I mean, yeah. Why is there not a power user mode in macOS where it's like when I do things like why can't I like su sudo and log in for those of you who are not like Linux people, basically sudo is like the ability to say I'm the super user of this computer and I should have the ability to do everything. And it'd be nice if you could log in as the super user in the GUI.
All right, I'm back. That was annoying.
You only have to do it once per computer.
Yes.
Per software update, per OS, per everything.
Gross.
A week.
Per week.
All right. Let's see. Okay, can you guys see that? Does this show up as a presentation? It says tangent. Awesome. Okay, so as Jess said, I'm Taylor Hadden. I make something called Tangent. And I'd like to talk about sort of the journey I took to making Tangent and what it is and where I'm excited about this space evolving to. Now I've got this spiel in Keynote here. I'm going to give that spiel and then we're going to jump over to being inside of Tangent. And once we're in there, let loose with all your questions and we can have a discussion properly. All right, so got my Twitter handles there and let's get started. So let's talk about, hang on, there we go. Let's talk about the road here. So, okay, tools for thought is like a really new term, but it's a really old concept. We've been using tools for thought forever. And my first tool for thought was my 5th grade binder with lots of different pieces of paper, 3-ring binder, great stuff. I obviously did homework with it, took class notes, but I also wrote down ideas for video games and stories and all sorts of stuff like that. And there's the first place I was capturing my brain in an external fashion. I eventually upgraded to my hand-me-down Sony Clay from my dad, and I, peppered that thing with my own thoughts using whatever note app was built into it. All of that information is, of course, lost. I have no idea how I could possibly find it again. Eventually, I upgraded to an iPod Touch. I used Awesome Note primarily back in the day when that was a thing. And then I upgraded to my own laptop. And at this point, I was using Circus Pony's notebooks, which is, I think, one of the OG fantastic tools for thought that you would qualify and be recognizable as a tool for thought tool today. It did a really great job of visually emulating a notebook in our old school skeuomorphic days. And it was really sad to see it die in the transition to iPad era. Anyway, once I got into college, I started needing to actually keep track of the progress of my thoughts and not just recording them. And that got me into project management sort of style software. And that's when I started using Trello. I used Trello for like 6 or 7 years on different projects. It worked really well. It had a good balance of easy to capture while also being easy to organize and being robust enough with filters and whatnot to let me parse down what I wanted to work on. Eventually, a project turned sour and I didn't want to use Trello anymore. I migrated to ClickUp. It had more features. It was more similar to Jira, which I was using professionally at the time. And it worked okay. It was good at organizing lots of information. It was quite bad at actually capturing the information. The UI was slow and kind of cluttered, and just sort of sketching out thoughts in preparation for organizing, it wasn't really its strong suit. Along the way, I also dabbled in Things, which is a really great app. It's a great to-do manager. Didn't really cut it for productivity, like proper project management. And Sorted was also something I used for a while. I really like its ability to quickly. So yeah, when I found Notion, I thought I sort of found the perfect note-taking app for me. It was a really good example of a database-driven, block-driven note application, and it had lots of great superpowers. But Notion has a problem, and that all your data in Notion is in Notion, and it's not on device. And if you don't have internet, it's basically not there. And that's kind of problematic for doing stuff like if you want to use a similar system for writing documentation and whatnot. So eventually I discovered Obsidian. I discovered Obsidian through CGP Gray's Cortex podcast. And through Obsidian, I discovered Andy Matuszek. And so this was a really big shift in my thinking about what notes could and should be. Andy's notes in particular were incredibly inspiring. The idea of having heavily interlinked notes that want to live forever or be updated regularly is a really cool concept, something I hadn't really considered before. Wiki links in particular were an awesome revelation. I'd used wiki links before in the context of using MediaWiki, but in my own notes, to have it so easily expressed, so easily edited, and not have to have, edit page, make change, come back, that workflow is much easier. And through this, I wrote more. I was journaling consistently for the first time ever, just because it was so easy to link into different thoughts. And so the journey sort of taught me some personal truths about what I want in a TFT going forward. And so I have some thoughts about my ideal note-taking system. And the first thing that really is really important to me is portability. Because if you can't take something with you, it's going to be left behind. And so when I think about what was really the ideal of portable stuff could be exportable, but I've lost lots of thoughts to formats that were impossible or hard or annoying to extract. There's notes on that Plie that never made it off the device when the device died. There's notes in Awesome Note that I probably could have exported if I'd had the presence of mind to at the time, but now they're definitely gone. So that's just an unfortunate way that information can be lost. I think readable notes are much better than exportable notes. And I mean that in this way. If your notes exploded, would you want to deal with something that looks like this or something that looks like this? One of those is much more readable. Now, the example on the right isn't perfect. It's just the text on the left embedded in a little JSON blob. But even this is sort of like the best case scenario of some data. If you have a Word document, for example, or a database-based note system, that data that you want access to is, in a binary blob somewhere that's not easily parsable. You're going to have to either use different tools or really invest heavily in extracting this information out into a more easily accessible format. And so plain text becomes really powerful. Plain text notes are, I think, my ideal. Plain text notes mean that you can search with anything on the system because it's just text. You can grep it. You can use Spotlight. It means you can sync with anything. I'm a huge fan of Git. And so I back up all of my notes to a Git repository. And I back up all my projects on Git repositories. And being able to do that with my notes has been really great because I have the peace of mind that I'm like, well, I can edit things aggressively. And if I really want to know what this was at one point in the past, I can just go back in time really easily. And you can also edit with anything. Obviously, we have our preferred tools and our preferred platforms, but because my notes are synced with iCloud, I can edit with IA Writer, or however you were supposed to pronounce that tool's name, on my phone really easily because it's just editing the iCloud files. And so Markdown is sort of like an ideal portable note-taking format. It's plain text, so it's easily parsed and indexed by anything. It's a very terse and readable format, and the formatting decisions, I think, make a lot of sense. If I were to make my own terse, plain text focused note-taking format, I would be stealing things from Markdown because I think it's very reasonable. And it's also universal. Your notes in Markdown are going to be understood by scads and scads of tools. They can be parsed into HTML. It's like the default for plain text parsing. So great, we've got a whole bucket of markdown notes, what I've sort of come to call a markdown lake. But now we need to like write them and use them and interact with them. And for that, user experience of my note-taking software is really critical. And the first thing I look for is the reading experience. Your notes need to look good, right? Good notes will spend most of their time being read. So if they're not fun to read, not engaging to read, you're not going to read them and you're not going to get all of the value out of your notes. So you need images, you need good syntax highlighting. Well, at least I do. I write lots of code in my notes. And your formatting needs to be beautiful and inviting. This is, of course, down to the preference of the reader. Perhaps the screenshots that you see on the screen don't appeal to you, but hey, that's what separate formatting is for. Your writing needs to be appealing to look at. And then, of course, you need to write this stuff. And there's a couple of different facets to this. And the first is that we're not writing with a pen, we're writing with a keyboard on computers. And so the keyboard experience is really important. A big facet for me is that my notes need to be immediately editable. I don't like having separate viewing and edit modes. I just want to say, oh, this part right here needs to be changed, select it, type, change it. No fuss, no muss, it's just different now. It means that you need really intuitive shortcuts, and really closely related to that is you need first-class keyboard navigation. I want to be able to control my notes, jump around my environment while not taking my hand off the keyboard, not using the mouse as much as possible. And also part of this is not having distractions while I'm typing. And another way to think about this for me is that text should act like text. I'm writing markdown. I want my markdown files to feel like plain text. And that means stuff like cross-paragraph selections need to work correctly. It also means that I don't like systems where there's automatic system commands triggered by common characters. The big offender for me here is slash commands. I use slashes all the time in my writing, and in Notion in particular, it always annoys me when I want to say something slash something else, and then I have to hit escape to make that silly window go away. So that's the crux of like the moment to moment with your fingers on the keyboard. And then that's applied in different ways. One of those is the capture experience. And so by capture, I mean like I have an idea and I want to get it into a note system before I forget it or it mutates in my brain and it's no longer the thing I think I really want to capture. And so the amount of time and the number of actions, the number of decisions you need to make between having that thought and recording it are really important. And you want those values, those numbers to be as low as possible. And in order to capture something, you need to answer some questions. You need to know, where does this go? This can be, what app am I going to record this in? It could be a piece of paper. Maybe that's where it's going to go. Maybe if your app is complicated, you need to decide where it's going to go in particular in that app. You need to maybe decide what's it called. This can be problematic if an app forces you to name something in order to add a new thing to it. That's bad, that adds friction. You wanted to sort of jot things down quickly. And the worst offender is, what is it? If you have to choose whether something is a project or a thought or some form of classification or type of a thought, that's going to slow you down. It's going to force you to categorize. And you don't want to categorize when you're just trying to express yourself. So all of these questions are questions that I want to avoid when I'm trying to look at my capturing experience. Rigidly organized systems are hard to add to, and they're hard to change. And when you're thinking about tools for thought, you really want to be doing both of those things all of the time. You want to be adding things all of the time, and you want to be updating them all of the time. So another part of writing is the linking experience. And I think links between notes are the natural way to organize information. If notes are linked to the things they relate to, they don't need to be classified in a hierarchical sense. The hierarchy, any hierarchy that you would want to express, is embedded in the notes structures themselves. If a note pertains to a topic, that note can link to that topic. And backlinks become a really important part of this. In that aforementioned example, if a note links to a topic and that topic can know all the things that have linked to it, there's your hierarchy. Or if hierarchy is the wrong word, there is your organization, because you can just find a topic and find all the things that are talking about that topic. And so this also engenders exploration, because you might land on a topic and not remember what you've been thinking about it. And backlinks provide really amazing ways to like just pull things back into your consciousness. And another part of this is that linking needs to be fluent. If creating links to notes is annoying or awkward, you're not going to make links to other notes, and you're going to lose all these benefits. Now, once we have a whole bunch of notes with interlinks between each other, we need to answer the question of how we're exploring them and how we're interacting with them. And in order to do that, you need to understand, like, hey, where are you in your notes? And where have you been in this exploration experience? And where do these links go? What on earth is here anyways? I think a lot of people, when they think of exploration, the thing they're most familiar with is browser tabs. This is how we've explored the internet for a really, really long time. Now, tabs have a couple of weird oddities. The tab metaphor really makes most sense when it refers to a particular document, a page. But tabs can be weird, because if you click on a link in a tab, you've replaced the page, essentially. You're now somewhere else, even though the tab is the same tab. And history in this structure is single dimensional. If I go on a Wikipedia jaunt, I might have branched in multiple places along this journey, but you can't tell. All you can see is the straight line history from where we are to where we started. So your meandering paths are erased, and you don't really know the full breadth of where you were. This is a problem in browsers, and this is a problem in note apps as well. And I think that we can do better when it comes to building good exploration user experience. Okay, so my ideal notes are portable, they're readable, they're writable, they're linkable, they're explorable. And Tangent is sort of my attempt to express my ideal notes system. Now, there are a lot of apps out there, as we've mentioned, and the first 4 are done very well by many. But I think that last item, the explorable item, is something that isn't really working for me in any one system. And so that was really one of the key impetuses behind developing Tangent, was making it so that the exploration system within my notes was really excellent. So with that in mind, let's look at Tangent. All right, I'm going to jump out of, somehow I'm going to jump out of this thing. Here we go. How do I get back to Zoom? Sorry, one second. I'm still figuring out this UI. Oh, there it is. Okay, let's stop that screen share. We'll hop over here and we'll share this screen. Okay. So here's Tangent. When I open Tangent, there's nothing here by default because I've cleared out my workspace. Now I've got a sidebar hidden in the side. It's got a whole bunch of notes in here, but I generally don't interact with the sidebar very much. When I want to start thinking about something in a day, what I do is I pull up the command palette and I say, hey, let's make a daily note. Oh, darn, this was supposed to be deleted. Excuse me. We're going to delete this. All right. So we got a daily note and we're going to start typing in it. There, tools for thought rocks. Or is the text still too small? 1 second. let me, there we go. Okay. There. Okay, hi there, Tools for Thought Rocks. Let's talk about tangent. Markdown. Okay, really easy to capture thoughts, really easy to link.
It's an Electron app.
It is an Electron app. Yes, it is. There's a couple of reasons that it's an Electron app. The primary reason is that as I was looking around for good plain text editors that require, or not plain, good rich text editors that required minimal faffing about, the best solutions were web-based. So Electron became the natural choice. All right. All right, so I used Tangent to support my wiki logging workflow. That's sort of like this idea of like, I have a daily note and it's just expressed by a series of a timestamp. This is all, I think, totally standard at this point. And so where we get somewhat less standard is what happens when we click on a link. And when we click on a link, we pull in that page on the side and we can see, okay, great, we've got this other page. It's got a whole bunch of other things going on. You can see, oh yeah, this is talking about my daily log. Cool. It's talking about mimetic notes. Amazing. Keep sliding over. If you're familiar with Andy's notes, and I would imagine every single person in this channel is, this sliding panel UI is really familiar to you. And this was something that really stuck in my brain, is like, I love this. This is one of the best UX improvements for exploration that I've ever seen. And you can just keep on diving further and further into this. And then at any moment you're like, okay, hang on. No, we need to go back. Where was I? We were back here. Great. Okay, what's this? And then we just replace it and we head off somewhere else. And so one of the things that I think is really useful in this is that if I have some cool new project that I'm working on, and I want to say, hey, I know I want to write about this. Well, I can just start writing about this immediately. And if I have particular thoughts on this, I can just leave notes for myself. It's like, I'm going to get to that later. Or, pardon the horrible example text. You can dive into something and you can just sort of make your own winding weird world of thinking in nouns. This is what I call my note-taking processes, proper noun links. Because I want to invoke concepts that are rich and meaty in a single link so that I can bring in context into a particular conversation I'm having with myself often, and be able to then find that information easily. Now, backlinks are important. I have backlinks here like this, and it's really easy to then say, hey, I want to pull that backlink in. And now we've lost our context. The thread that we're looking at is completely different from the thread we started with. And so this is the part, this is the aspect that I thought no other app was doing particularly well. And so my solution is this automatically generated mind map looking thing. So this was put together over, as we were browsing, as I was showing things off. And we can see these trails that have been created along the system. And it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I was here. Let's go there. And now that thread is pulled back together. And I find this incredibly valuable when I'm working through complex thoughts and I'm linking between things and I'm not entirely sure where I'm going, but there's something in my head telling me to keep writing and keep exploring these thoughts. And as I'm doing this, often these thoughts sort of start spidering together and creating connections in ways that I didn't necessarily see coming when I was trying to express these things. And through these sort of atoms, you get these connections, and this example is contrived, and so the pattern is a little strange, but it becomes really much easier to see where the thrust of your overall thought process is connecting in pinch points and finding commonality. And so another thing that is useful here is that you can see that there's a difference between links that we have followed, which show up with full clarity, and then we have these other links that are less obvious because they were linked to, but they weren't followed. So if we hop back to this original one here and we start popping in here, and then we hop back in here, this link is now fully highlighted. This has been a really nice addition to the system that I added a couple of weeks ago, because it means that when I link to something, it usually means that I want to see it in context, right? It's part of what's going on in my brain. And when I zoom back out to this higher level, having those like, hey, you mentioned this, but didn't necessarily follow through, meant that I can leave notes for myself. So example, in our contrived fun new project, I linked to fun new project should be awesome, but that file doesn't exist yet. But through this system, I can just make it, and I can start typing. And then I can pull in that backlink really easily. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there, and I wonder if you guys have any questions about this system. There's lots of things involved in making a note-taking app, and those things can be pretty distracting, but I keep on coming back to this core auto mapping experience and trying to see what I can add to make it even better. So I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts.
I have two thoughts that come to mind really fast. Number one is, can you save this as like a snapshot of today's session? And number two is, can you like drop items from the tree or do something so that, oh, I followed this link, but today, in this current session or thought space, it's not really relevant. So I don't want to have it sort of taken up space in my brain and visual field.
Totally. So, saving isn't supported yet, but that's on my to-do list. So something that I want to do. I think that's going to be really valuable. When it comes to dropping things, 1000%. I'm totally often in places where like, you know what, I don't want to see this tree anymore. So I can say, hey, remove this and all of your children, bam, and now it's gone. And now it just gets out of the way. And undo is supported. So you can be like, oh, I actually didn't mean to delete that, give it back.
Taylor, can you show that the delete? I missed the, well,
oh,
how
sure.
do you
So
remove something? Oh, right.
So,
click.
I mean, you can select something and you can delete it. And if you just delete it that way, then all of the sub nodes in it just sort of flop back. Now that they're disconnected, they drop down to the root. But if you know that you don't want this and any of these, you can delete this and all of the children as well. And it gets rid of all of the other items.
That's interesting. Taylor, I don't know if you've seen the chat. But there's been, if you look around, you'll see like a little chat bubble and you can pull that up.
Yeah.
Just to summarize, kind of like there's been a dialogue in the chat as you've been talking. Seems like one of the things that most people are most interested in is this tree view and comparing it to sort of the graph constellation view that you find in a lot of other applications like Roam and Obsidian has these, graph views. And yeah, I guess one of the sort of questions that hasn't been stated explicitly, but people have been kind of talking about, it's like, how do you find this particular view like most useful? Like what mode of thought are you in when you're using it? What are like, do you find yourself flipping between this and sort of entry or capture, or is this more of like you're summarizing into a new note? Like, can you give us some offense for your workflow when you're working in this view?
For sure. So I just want to comment in the chat thread that I'm seeing here. I agree with a lot of the comments about the constellation view. When I first found Obsidian, the constellation view was like, whoa, this is cool. Look at all the cool connections that my notes have. But it quickly became apparent that it was actually kind of useless because it's not static, but it changes every time you look at it. And because of that, any benefit you might get from like using your spatial reasoning to know where something is and what it's connected to is completely lost because it's just different every time. And I think that's basically makes that view useless, aside from just whiz bang, ain't this neat, cool screenshots. So to your question of how I use this view, this view is sort of like a recent documents, like a 2D recent documents with showing the thread of how I got from one document to the other. So I treat this information right now as totally transient, and I'm only interested in it for as long as I am holding something that I'm trying to express in my head. And then once it's had its use, I make it go away and clear it out completely. And you can do things like saying, hey, this temporal note links to things like task notes, and you can add
so
things.
you can build up your own sort of workspace.
Yeah, and it works with backlinks too. So you can get a little weird sometimes with the auto layout. The auto layout is like super, like version 1.1 in terms of how it works. But the goal of it is just like, one of the things I dislike about a lot of visual layout notes is that you have to organize it yourself. I'm really lazy, and I really hate being like, oh, I need more space for this thing. I'd rather just have the computer do it for me. It's what I've really liked about mind mapping software for forever. So this is sort of like, what's the term? The term for it is non-recursive directional graphs, something like that. That's sort of what this is more about, where something can have multiple parents and multiple children at the same time. And that can really help because things are going to be referenced by multiple things just naturally. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. Except I think it would be cyclic, right? Orion saying
Yeah,
cyclic.
non-cyclic directed graph or something like that. Here, I probably have it written down. Directed acyclic graph. So yeah, there's that. And yeah, so tangent is still pretty early, but it supports things like pasting in notes and pasting in links to images rather. And I'm adding features slowly. I also have a new one. No, go ahead.
Oh no, that'll definitely impact feature velocity. Yeah, one other question I had, I love that you were kind of going towards the offline or the local first software, offline only, that kind of stuff. I'm curious, can I just open a folder full of markdown files in Tangent?
Yep. Absolutely.
Very
It's
cool.
really easy to. I built, when I built this, I had a big old chunk of stuff that I'd written in Obsidian, and I didn't want to lose it. So this was, I mean, the linking syntax is identical to Obsidian. So if you have an Obsidian vault, just point tangent at it, and you should be fine for, at least for me, 90% of what I used Obsidian for. So yeah.
I've got a maybe pragmatic question.
Sure.
What benefit did you get from building this on your own versus building plugins for Obsidian?
Yeah. So when I was using Obsidian, I was using the sliding panel plugin. And that plugin is how I found Andy, actually. I was looking around the plugin ecosystem for Obsidian, found this, was like, this is cool. Who the heck is Andy? And that's how that happened. And so that got me like 85% to what I have right now, right? Obsidian's a really good tool. That plugin was all right. It had some jank to it, but there were just some niggling UX issues that kept on bugging me. One of them was with that plugin. Hey, I needed to, if I wanted to change the title of a note, I needed to turn my head and type vertically, which was a total pain in the butt. That was unsatisfying. I needed to resort to some hacks to get the title of the note to show up above the note as well as in the sidebar, just because of how that plugin works, which I didn't enjoy, and broke easily with different themes. I started seeing, I had an old 2015 MacBook Pro, and I started seeing some pretty extreme performance issues. That was sort of the rather heavy straw that broke the camel's back, when they're like, hey, my typing experience is starting to poke the 100 milliseconds threshold. And that was just like, this is gross, and I don't want to use this anymore. And I think another little tiny item that kept frustrating me is that if I wanted to follow a link, I had to hit Command and Shift in order to make sure that it opened up in a new panel. And I would constantly not do that, and then need to screw around trying to go back to where I was and then open the note again. And that was just sort of annoying. So when I was thinking about, hey, I really want to have this cool mind mappy system, the experience I imagined in my head included all these other little bits and details of like, in this perfect system, everything's exactly the way I want it. And when I considered like, hey, do I try and make an Obsidian plugin? It was a thought I had. I immediately thought like, hey, if I'm going to spend all of this time making something, it's going to take a lot of time. And I don't want to spend that time fighting against what a program is that I can't control. And if I have a lot of particular preferences, and I have a lot of those, I'd rather just be making them exactly the way I want it to be. So that, yeah, it was because I'm persnickety is like the really base answer to that. I'm persnickety, and UX nuance is something that I'm really sensitive to.
Cool. Michael has his hand up. Michael, you want to ask your question?
I can definitely appreciate what you just said there with the UI UX thing. I just wish I could program to fix a lot of the problems that I see. My question was related to that tree view. What do you call it? And then in a follow-up to what was just asked, in terms of the tree view, do you see any difficulties just from a programmatic perspective to create that as a plugin in Obsidian? Like, is it possible to do?
Sure. So I call it a map. I call it my tangent map. Because the name of the program is in my opinion, a great programmer name, because it is what it says on the tin. It's about writing in tangents, and this is the map of all the tangents you've been on. So it's the tangent map. And okay, so I am not familiar with Obsidian plugins. When I was considering whether or not to do this, it was somewhat abstractly. It's like before I dove into the effort of like, am I going to learn the nuances of learning Obsidian's plugin API, or do I just sort of figure out how I'm going to do this with Electron and Svelte, which is what this is put together in. I'd already used Svelte. I'm a web dev hobbyist, and have been for a really long time. So I was very comfortable, and I was very self-assured that I could do whatever the heck I wanted to in on a blank canvas. And I was super leery of investing a bunch of time into someone else's sandbox, I guess, is really the crux of it. And so I do think you could pull this off. I mean, people have pulled off some pretty cool stuff, some pretty wild stuff in Obsidian with plugins. So I have no doubt that you could make a plugin that does this and has very similar functionality. It's just not where I decided to put my effort. Yeah,
that makes sense. Taylor, it looks like Dalton has a question as well. Go ahead.
I think you're muted, Dalton.
Yeah.
There we go. So two things came to mind. The first was towards the beginning, both you and Jess were talking about ways to interact more across our different systems. And I think I'm very picky about how I want to organize my thoughts, and I don't expect anyone else to want to organize their thoughts the same way. And I think that our efforts are going to start taking off more once there's a way for me to use part of your system in my system and so forth, and interchange these things more. But one thing that did kind of a new workflow thought for me that came out of what you showed off was like, so right now, partly because of that, I'm a heavy Obsidian user in like very basic mode. I just use it for capture. I have a ton of notes. I can search them. I've been doing that since this summer, and it's been extremely useful. And I have found even linking to be far too heavyweight. The search bar gives me enough for what I need, but it would be really nice to have tools to do kind of more of what I want. But in terms of basic capture, what I find myself doing over and over is I'll start typing, I'll start doing subheadings, I'll just like make nested bullets. And then if I have a new topic, I'll do that further down the page. I might have, 3 or 4 of these things going on. And so I like this workflow of being able to kind of, it's a similar workflow, just more nicely visually structured. And it'd be great to be able to just kind of like building up these stacks, popping part of the stack, maybe putting it on a different stack, and just like grabbing nodes of the graph and organizing on the fly. So that I really like that workflow.
Cool. Yeah. One of the things that I've been trying to keep in mind is like the system that you're using, and like your workflow doesn't, or in my opinion, shouldn't be married to the app. Like the app shouldn't really be enforcing a workflow. The fact that I have daily notes, the fact that I put things in an inbox folder is not like an inbuilt demanded feature of Tangent. You could do whatever the heck you wanted. And so long as it's markdown files with wiki links, Tangent doesn't care. It's the only thing that it's really built around supporting. If you didn't use wiki links, it wouldn't be able to do a lot of what makes it special. So that's the one feature that's extra in terms of what it asks for. So yeah, I more to your thought about like sharing, I agree that nobody has the same brain, and expecting that we all find a system that all works for everybody is ludicrous. It's never going to happen because we don't want to express ourselves the same. Personally, I think when it comes to sharing our thoughts, I think the model of published digital gardens is a really strong one, because you can just sort of, it's a website. And I don't think we need something much more terribly complex than a hyperlinked website to share information. I think that's a really good way of getting things done. And so long as the links to those websites make sense, it's really easy to share and reference and interlink stuff into your own thoughts. So honestly, I'm a big Web 1.0 kind of guy at this point. I think the web was really good, still really good is when it's really basic, and we don't need to get really complicated to get a lot of work done in it and have a big impact.
Awesome. Taylor, have you written anything about the tangent map? Any place where people could find it?
Not really.
Yeah.
There's a couple thoughts of like where it started that's on my the Everything Abridged blog, but I haven't written about it as like a here's the theory and how it should be used. I view it very much as like the thing that Tangent does that is the least fully understood by me. I've built it. I like how it works. I think it could do more things, and I want to develop it further. And I'm treating it almost with kid gloves as I build out other features of the tool, because I don't want to come in here and make it really, really complicated and then make it awful because of that.
Yeah.
So I'm adding in features really lightly. And
Gotcha.
Go ahead.
I think it's probably the least well understood thing in your system, which also makes it the most interesting. A lot of the other stuff that you're doing is very well understood, of like, okay, hyperlinks, we kind of know how to do that, markdown with like hidden, formatting and that kind of stuff. As soon as you type it, the formatting goes away. Pretty well understood at this point, but I think that's what makes it really interesting and really valuable that you're exploring this UI. And if you're open to it, writing something or putting together some sort of writing or demo or something about this, that would, I think you could get some good, I think they're just based on this conversation, a lot of us are exposed to a lot of different ideas in the tools for thought space. Sounds like something that if you got a broader audience thinking about this, you might actually have some people building a plugin in Obsidian that does similar things, and then you can kind of have a dialogue around
Sure.
and have
What
other
works
people
well.
developing this UI at the same time.
Yeah,
So.
I think that's a good idea. It's definitely something that probably belongs on the app website of like, hey, what the heck is this? There's like 2 paragraphs on it right now, and there probably needs to be a few more and some actual visual demonstrations.
Cool. Well, last question, and then I have an idea for how we could use another 20 minutes of our time here, since we have scheduled for another half hour. Kepta asks, where do you see Tangent 1 year from now?
So in 1 year from now, actually, that's a good question. We can come over here and look at the roadmap. So right now I'm working on note creation rules, which are ways to define like auto-created notes. And then as I look forward to the future, the things that I'm looking for are sort of stepping into a productivity space in what I imagine to sort of be like a to-do system that evolves into documentation for various projects. And so some of that is like having collated to-dos, which when I first started on this journey, I was shocked to find that there are very few applications that are like, hey, you have 50 to-do items across all of your notes. That's started coming online now, but that was not something that existed back when I started this thing. Yeah, to-dos and a notes is totally still unsolved. That's another weird thing that I'm looking at. And I think also, like, if I'm going to be trying to use Tangent as like a Trello or other like a Kanban board type of task management thing, that with using markdown files isn't really a native usage of markdown files. So that could get weird. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that weirdness might shake out. Other things that I'm really looking forward to is getting using properties in notes, and the fact that there are to-dos, that sort of thing, and generating query style syntax, so that instead of saying, or so the most basic is like, hey, look at this folder and I want to see this folder as cards. And so that's something that sort of exists right now. If I hop over to my inbox shows up with a series of cards, and it's easy to come in and jump out and go to somewhere and be like, oh yeah, what could this be? Really nice and easy. This is, as it is, kind of a hack right now, and I want to expand it to be more of a feature and make it so that you can say, hey, give me all of the notes that are linked to X note and do link to this other note. That sort of stuff in a query syntax or query structure, much how Obsidian's data view or logseek's system works. And I want to use that as like the core of the productivity stack. Is how I visualize that happening. Other things that are going to be important is sort of expanding into more of a mind mappy mode. I think the tangent maps are really useful. And then I also imagine a mind map editing mode for notes themselves. So if I'm doing outliney stuff, being able to express that and explore that from a mind mapping environment is something that I really want to be able to do, so that you can view your notes in both formats and they're sort of interchangeable and the information is there. Let's see, and someone had a question. Johan, publishing my notes to Tangent. So I built out a really crude web publishing script back when I was using Obsidian to publish my Obsidian notes to my website, and I'm still using that and publishing it that way. In the future, I do want to implement a web interface that acts and resembles the sliding panel system that Tangent has, so that it's a little bit more quote unquote native, and you can explore in the same way that I can explore. so that the experience of moving through my thoughts is closer to the experience I have when moving through my thoughts. And some other things and long-term goals. I really want to be able to link to websites and have them show up as panels. I think that could be really interesting. And being able to then say, go on a Wikipedia jaunt. As each page goes by, you can see the path that you've gone through Wikipedia, and that's sort of diving into something for that makes it almost a browser, which could be really interesting and is an avenue that I'm looking to explore. Another thing that I think could be is on the horizon that I think is a really interesting potential feature is figuring out how to do multiplayer collaboration while still respecting hey, your primary source for your stuff is on your hard drive, and how to do that in a way that doesn't suck and doesn't require you to link to a centralized server. So yeah. Those were a bunch of
that little easy thing of like
supporting
collaboration while online.
That can is getting there's a reason
problem.
it's last in this list. It's
yeah, it's the building that will be a research challenge all itself. Orion has his hand up, and then we'll legit make this the last question. So go ahead, Orion.
Yeah, hopefully this will be quick. I'm just curious because I really love the tree structure that you have there, and it's a lot more useful than like the hairball graphs and all of that kind of stuff. I'm kind of curious if you see other places where you'd like to have that, right? Like now that you're immersed in this, because it strikes me that there's a lot of other things that have this same structure, right? Like under the hood, the kind of undo redo pattern, right, is a lot closer to this than what we actually have access to with the shortcuts. The same with the way that you say browse the internet, right? Like you maybe go back a few steps, then go forward again, and you have that kind of that structure, right, that like emerges out of a lot of these different behaviors. I guess I'm asking, like, now that you've built this and immersed yourself in it, do you just kind of see this like everywhere? Is that a thing?
I do wish it existed everywhere. I think if I were to imagine if I had an unlimited budget and unlimited time, I would totally try and make some like very complicated OS or app that had like this sort of tree at the core of it. It's like, hey, I opened an email and that's an item, and that email had a link and that's an item, and then you spider off from there and you can see that, oh, once you zoom out, it's like, oh, I started going on this journey on this website because of this email. Oh, I should probably respond to that email, and that response to that email becomes its own item in the tree. I think I view that with sort of like a, wouldn't that be really freaking cool? But I also look at it from like a needing to take on only so much, right? I need to limit my perspective to something that's actually achievable. And, maybe I end up in a scenario where I have sort of by one way or another built a browser because I wanted my notes and the internet to interleave more seamlessly. But I'm going to cross that bridge slowly, one step at a time, simply by way of how I started this project and what is the easiest pathway to get to what I wanted as quickly as possible.
Well, Taylor, one of the things that you mentioned that's really cool is you're getting to iterate on the UI and the experience inside this sort of limited domain of like, within my notes, how might I best navigate between sort of a note view and that kind of stuff. So I think it's a really great place to be able to kind of work out the UI patterns, and then you can kind of expand from there of like, okay, great. What if I could view my browsing history in the same way? Okay, yeah. That might be just a plugin in Chrome to be able to do that. And you can you're working with a different type of thing at that point before you like tackle the operating system. So I love that very pragmatic approach here. And I'm actually really curious to see where you go with this tangent map idea. I definitely want to download Tangent now and open my Markdown lake and see what it's like to click around using this thing. Well, thanks, Taylor, for that presentation. Really appreciate the great job prepping and going through it. Everybody can give him a hand for showing up.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so we've got about 25. What's that?
No, I was very happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah. We got about 25 minutes left, and I had we don't have another speaker today, but I had two potential discussions that we could dive into. And so I'll bring these up. If you find neither of these interesting, we can talk about something that you guys propose, or you can just get some of your time back. But here's the two questions that had been kicking around in my brain for the last couple of months, and I've had dialogue with some different people around it. So the first one would be like, what's the difference between a medium and a tool? So we talk about mediums, we talk about tools for thought, we talk about, is there a difference between a medium and a tool? What is, is that even a useful distinction? And so I have some thoughts on this that I could basically preface, like prime the discussion, and then we could I'd be curious where other people are thinking about this. And then the second one is one that I posted on Twitter that Taylor actually responded to, which is, how is a tool for thought also a tool for learning, and how is it not a tool for learning? And it was interesting to hear kind of different perspectives. But I thought, in terms of like, we could quickly vote on which of these topics is most interesting. We can use the reactions feature in good old Zoom here. And so I'm looking at everybody's screens. If you are interested in talking about mediums, then let's see, which reaction are we going to use here? If you're interested in talking about mediums, use the clapping hands. And if you're interested in talking about learning, then use one of the other ones. Which one? I guess the party sign. Party. And this is clapping. And I'm just looking, we got claps, 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 one party, 4 claps, 1 party, 5 claps, 2 parties. Cool, got 5 claps, 2 parties. So I guess we'll go with that. So I'm going to give a very, very quick introduction to mediums. I've been thinking about this a lot and reading a lot on this particular topic, including like deep theory stuff like Marshall McLuhan and all that kind of stuff of like the medium is the message and that kind of thing. The basic idea, though, that I'm very curious about is my conception. The way that I think about this is that a medium for thinking would be something like the sort of Platonic ideal for a way to represent thought. So an example would be maybe a table, right? A table in the Platonic ideal is, just columns and rows, right? And so we can kind of structure our thinking by throwing things into a table. And then there are tools for thought out there, but tools embody or use mediums. So you can have a table tool inside of, or you can use the medium of the table inside a tool. So Markdown famously has terrible tables, but has them, right? Like you can actually like write a table in Markdown. A spreadsheet sort of is a table we can talk about. I think spreadsheet's another medium actually. And then like wiki links, I think, are a medium for thinking, like hyperlinks, that kind of stuff. But you have them in a lot of different tools. So that's kind of the way that I think about it. There's these, and so there are actually a very small and limited number of mediums, the way that I'm defining medium. But tools can then use those media, like bring those mediums into the tool, and a tool might have a lot of different mediums, or sort of, or might like focus on a single one, like text edit would just be sort of plain text, which has the sort of medium of plain text. So that's kind of the way I think about it. I'm curious if other people find that distinction helpful or evocative or disagree.
I think there's definitely like an interplay there. And I think the idea of, I'm kind of more jazzed at the idea of tools of thought creating a new medium, in the sense that, in the same way that some people talk about the sort of competition between books and tweets at like opposite ends of these, size chunking, but the branching and social granularity of tweets, making them much more accessible in certain ways. And the fact that most books are probably 5 times the length that they should be anyway. Like, how do those things change things, and the hypertexty aspect of that. And so when you see something like a tree view, and the idea of saving that as a session and things, like how does that start to change the way that other people access your information, or that you access your past information and build it into the future? And then, if you start playing with graph maps that are 3-dimensional, and in your AR goggles or something like that, that perhaps helps you find new connections between things or add new connections. And so that, at some point that is a different medium, you could say. And it may also be like one of those sort of fractal, differentiation things, like, everything's a tool and everything's a medium. And it's just sort of the way that you think about it at that moment, and you sort of shift your headset. So I'm on drugs at the moment. So.
Drugs could be a medium for thinking.
Yeah.
So I think I've recently been finding medium to not be a super useful word, just because of how many different ideas people have about it. But the way I think about it is that I think of tools as an extension to like a person or an agent. So it's like something that directly expands your capabilities for interacting with the world. And then I think of a medium as like an interaction space, like a persistent interaction space. So it's a place where the effects of those actions will be observable in the future and externalized.
Yeah, that makes sense. Orion had said in chat, it feels that one distinction is mediums sort of define a possibility space, and whereas tools have a notion of use or intention behind them. Agree that mediums sort of define a set of things that you can do to like reduce. I love the idea of possibility space. It's one of my favorite terms. But the idea that you have things that are possible to do within, and there are limits to what you can do. Mediums sort of provide a space in which you can do certain things and you can't do other things because they're outside of the possibility space. Orion, could you say more about tools having an intention or a notion of use? What's that mean exactly?
I can try. I mean, I think actually Dalton had a pretty good framing for that, really, right? Which is that like tools have this context of some agent that's using them, right? Even if it's not necessarily a computer, I guess, or a human. Like I guess you could imagine tools being used by computers or something if you want to go there, but it feels like that doesn't apply to mediums to me. I mean, I'm personally pretty agnostic about the distinctions here. I love the term medium, like I prefer it, but I think there are a lot of valid ways that you can like kind of divide up the ontology there. But yeah, I kind of agree with Dalton that it's around its relationship to some agent or like user or something along those lines feels kind of fitting to me.
Gotcha. I think one of the very first ontological like divides for me that was really helpful was a post by Linus Lee about a year and a half ago called "Build Tools Around Workflows, Not Workflows Around Tools." And like dividing the idea of a workflow from a tool was like a revolutionary moment for me of, oh wait, like maybe I actually want what I'm trying to accomplish is actually a workflow of like, oh, I capture some things, I type them, I organize them, and I publish them on my website. Like that's like an example, a real high level example of a workflow. But a tool may help me accomplish better or worse different parts of that workflow. And so what Linus advocated in that post was like, start with the workflow and then build a tool with that workflow in mind that accomplishes that workflow. But what we most often do is we take a tool and then we take off the shelf and then we're like, well, I'm going to try to cobble together a workflow around that. But the tool itself like has a possibility space or whatever that like may support some parts of that workflow and may like totally prevent it. And so we end up fighting our tools a lot because we actually, we are limited in the workflows that we can enact because the tool doesn't allow you to do more.
So I'm a tools engineer professionally. And so that resonates with me a lot. My job, I work in game development, and my job is to understand what my fellow developers want to accomplish and remove as many roadblocks as possible from their path so that they can do what they want as efficiently as possible. So I'm spoiled in that I'm used to people getting bespoke tools for exactly what they want. And I think there's a lot there's a lot of truth there. And I think part of that is just it's natural to get excited about a new tool because a new tool opens up new possibility spaces, and a good new tool that's genuinely new and exciting is going to make things viable and possible that were just simply not viable before. Like, it's non-viable to make something that can be shared very easily with thousands and thousands of people, and then you invent a printing press or you invent the internet, and suddenly things that were not viable at all, not because of a tool, are way more viable, way more accessible. People have built businesses around WordPress because they make the business of getting hypertext in front of people way easier than needing to spin up a website all on your own.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think one of the things, Taylor, that's exciting for me, and Bill hinted at this when he responded initially, is that the tangent map actually feels like the inkling of a new medium, which I think is rather rare. And so like that, like pulling, I would encourage you to like pull on that thread, but get other people pulling on it as well, because there could be something there in terms of a medium and way. And again, my definition of medium, I realize that some of us are saying maybe it's not an important distinction between tool and medium, but the reason I think the tangent map is interesting is it's a way of representing relationships among objects. That's sort of an understood way. Like Taylor, you're really good at manipulating that medium already, right? Or that tool, whatever you want to call it. You've spent a lot of time in it. So it's really natural for you to like jump into something and jump out and add nodes, and like you're familiar with it. And if you could, if that turns out to be like a really valuable way to organize and communicate ideas and like relationships among concepts, that could be a medium that other people sort of adopt and start to, just like mathematical notation, you have to learn the notation in order to be able to read it and get value out of it. The same thing goes with the tangent map. If we could read that and develop the UI in such a way that like I hand one to Bill and it's actually meaningful, of like, oh, Jess was thinking about this stuff, like this map represents these concepts and how they're related, that could be that's really compelling to me. I think that's a really rare thing. So cool.
And I think there's that sort of co-creation cycle where, sometimes you create a tool that has, a little bit of a nudge of a new idea. And then in using it, it sort of creates the idea of a new medium around. It's sort of like the seed of a new medium. And then you build a new tool or extend that tool to more fully express that, in the same way that, the first movies were like, plays that were being filmed, and you kind of start out with the tool that makes that easy to do. And you say, oh, well, now that we're here, that makes me think that we could use 2 cameras and shift back and forth and cut, and we could like totally change the way that we capture, people's emotions up close. And so all of a sudden, it sort of bootstraps the process. I mean, it's sort of like a whole Engelbart kind of mentality about bootstrapping.
So one of the most, oh, go ahead.
Oh, Dalton. No.
I was going to say one of the most useful, I guess, ontological cuts for me, to use a similar term, this past year, is around modeling. So it's like the real world and models of the world. And there's kind of a rich history of this in robotics and kind of early AI and so forth. But I mean, I can talk more about that, but I recently revisited Brett Victor's, I think it was the Magic Ink essay. It was like one of the first things that he put out. And I had forgotten that he talked about this approach in particular. This was something that like articulated really well. But basically the idea that there's like, the important things are just how things actually are, and then your models in various forms, whether they're mental or in the computer, etc. And another thing from the kind of robotics angle, but I made a comment earlier about symbol grounding. So an issue in robotics is what's called the symbol grounding problem. It's like, how do you connect these, descriptions of things and text and so forth to what they actually represent? And I feel like in a lot of the conversations in kind of the tools for thought world, like, especially because we're specifically focused on like thought and so much of that is verbal, we often live kind of entirely in this like disconnected symbol world. And I think models are a really good way to connect that to the world that these symbols are describing.
Now, aren't models just a form of symbols in and of themselves? It's all abstract. Like a symbol is fundamentally an abstract model, or vice versa.
There
So-
are two branches of epistemology that basically, do we have direct access to real things, or is everything mediated through an experience? And yeah, those are like, at the top of epistemology, you like go one way or the other. Like you can either access things directly, or like everything's Plato's cave, right? So kind of a philosophical question, but Dalton, it looked like you were going to respond. Yeah.
I mean, I think the entire science side is Plato's cave. Like, I don't think the direct access thing is like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
I think Dalton, I'm also really intrigued by this idea of modeling, and sort of this broader topic for me is what I call knowledge representation. But
Mhm.
basically, like anytime we have knowledge that like we want to share with each other, we like convert it into words.
Yep.
And then we share it with someone, and then they like have to deconvert it and like
Yep.
interpret those words. And then, but the idea that comes up in their head is almost certainly not what you had in your head, right? Like there's a translation layer that's happening between the two of us. As I convert it into English, you convert it back from English into a concept. And one of the really exciting things to me about computers, in an area that I feel like is basically untouched with computers, is that we actually have the opportunity with computers to represent something that's closer to the thing itself.
Absolutely.
Right? Like we can like build a simulation that shows the thing, in motion, that you can like have a time scrubber and see it over time and all that kind of stuff. It's a much more direct representation of that thing that the idea that we're bantering about, than converting it into English and having you back convert it. And
What I didn't realize is that I've been having thoughts like this over the past year, but I didn't realize this was such a core part of the early kind of like ARPA days and so forth. So I finally read The Dream Machine for the first time, and it was very helpful in like connecting a lot of the threads. But I had not read Licklider's papers and the like man-machine symbiosis, and what was the next one? But the next one, he basically describes exactly what you just said in very nice cartoon illustrations. And I think that's really where the good stuff is.
Agreed. And I think that's where you get, you get a lot of sort of people from the early days of computing who are frustrated with the sort of state of computing. And they're like, guys, there's so much more. There's so much more. And I think that's why, not because they hate, SaaS business models necessarily, but because they see a bigger picture of what's possible. And so I think that sometimes we can like disregard their complaints or concerns as like sort of old people saying, get off my lawn, kind of thing. But I do think that there was a broader vision for what is possible with computers, that they're trying to draw our attention to. And sometimes we can mishear what they're saying, so I don't know, exciting stuff. It's cool that Dalton, I also read Dream Machine last year, and that was one of the things that stuck out for me, but I wasn't sure how much it connected for other people. So it's nice to hear someone else who read it and came away with a similar takeaway. Well, we have like 2 minutes left and yeah, does anybody have any sort of final comments or thoughts?
One, maybe just a final jumping off point, but back to the magic ink thing, there was a nice like trichotomy he laid out between information software, which is constructing a model internal to the mind, manipulation software, constructing models external, and then communication software, which is constructing internal models that are shared with others. It just seems like a good thing to come back to.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm actually going to have to go look at that essay again. And that seems like a pretty helpful taxonomy as well when we're thinking about the things we're talking about. Well, folks, thanks for being here. We'll wrap up on time. It's great to see Bill, Michael, always awesome for your contributions and questions, as well as Bill's prolific links. I'll send out once I get the other half of the video from Dalton, I'll stitch them together and post it to YouTube. So we'll have the recording up there. And next month, if anybody's interested in speaking alongside Alex, I'll probably be reaching out to some folks to try and get somebody, but if one of you would like to talk, would love to hear what you have to talk about. Great. Thanks, y'all. Have a great Thursday.